Futurama Simpsons Infinitely Secret Crossover Crisis 2. I love that it's only 2 issues, because when you look at crossovers like Worlds Unite and Collide, they overstayed their welcome with way more issues than that. Once again, the crossover does a time skip thing instead of showing us stuff. Bender gets banned from Moe's bar because he was fighting the love testing machine for being a flirt, even though it's not a sentient robot. It would actually feel less contrived if he got kicked out for drinking too much. They get threatened by a mugger, and once again the comic cuts ahead instead of showing us the cool stuff. There's absolutely no reason for us to not see Bender beat up the mugger. And how did he get his tattoo on his metal arm anyways? Homer's totally fine with this, instead of scared of Bender. Predictably, Homer says Bender can have a bed and something to eat. But out of nowhere, he tells Flanders to give that to him. I guess even he's getting tired of all the different times someone stayed at his house for an episode. It cuts ahead to Farnsworth telling Grandpa Simpson how he invented the smelloscope. And Abe tells him a lie that he should know would be dismissed as a lie. I guess the idea is he's senile, but I'm not impressed. Farnsworth is better because he can actually achieve cool stuff to make up for that kind of humor. He says he used black hole energy just to stop breakfast cereal from going soggy in milk. Somehow. When it'd go soggy the instant it fell in the milk. I can see why these 2 characters were shown together because they both sound like they're making up crazy lies. The professor in this universe is amazed by Farnsworth, and his father reveals that it's normal to make up stories around here. But if Farnsworth was here for long enough, he'd start inventing and prove that he isn't crazy. The professor wants to sign Farnsworth out. Wouldn't he know that only a family member or someone legally responsible for him could do that? He shows morality because he regrets having to do this and summons a robot to awesomely crash through the wall. So he's able to get Farnsworth in the car with him. And for some reason he asks why he came with him, even though he would love to hang out with a fellow scientist. Maybe he just prefers being around people he knows he's smarter than, since he hates Wormstrom. Flanders nicely offers Bender a smoothie, but then asks what he's doing to his jukebox. Bender tells him not to turn on the lights, and Flanders faints, and gets rightfully humiliated as his kids make it clear that he faints a lot and needs sissy salts. Bit of an overreaction because he's just a robot. Zoidberg says the food at the buffet is his and he'll kill them all if they try to take it. Usually seems like a nice guy. Burns says he finds his use of death threats so refreshing. I don't know why he says people claim they're not PC anymore instead of saying that most people are PC. That was confusing dialogue. Hermie says the food needs more spice, and he was smart enough to keep some in his back pocket just in case. That's impressive. He kept a spice thing shaped like Mom with him, and the seasonings gave Smithers some confusing feelings because she reminds him of someone. Who? Burns? Burns starts choking on sesame seeds on a bun somehow. And Zoidberg insists on helping him because he feels like he's a doctor. So he asks for a plugged-in toaster and throws it into the punch bowl to shock him. Must be an old-fashioned toaster. Why would its plug extend so far out? Why would someone actually give it to him? I guess because everyone hates Burns. Logically, Burns would die from this if it even did shock him. But miraculously, he's not only fine, but says Zoidberg saved his life and wants him to be his new personal doctor. I guess he figures that he'll think of inventive new solutions other doctors wouldn't, so he trusts him more. Somehow Fry doesn't know Bart was responsible for him getting locked in all night. And all he had to eat were some things he should have known were toxic and inedible. Also, why is nobody, no matter how rude, commenting on the fact that Fry and Leela have skin that isn't yellow? You'd think somebody would be lampshading it. I guess they assume it's a skin mutation, but Bart would totally be the type to make fun of him. He shows Bart a Simpsons comic to prove that he was telling him the truth. Too bad I didn't think to do this earlier. I suppose it makes sense that he forgot he had it with him, because normally you wouldn't keep a comic with you wherever you go. He even shows him a panel with the 2 of them talking, which makes no sense because it wasn't made like that originally. Somehow the story is changing because he's there with his friends. Bart's amazed that he's on a lot of merchandise and TV, and says that if he has this kind of comic, He could just look in the comic and see where his friends are. At least Fry feels stupid about this. I didn't think of this, but that's because I knew it'd make no sense for the comic to be any different just because he went to another universe. His actual body is outside of the comic, and that's where the comic is. Bart thinks Cowabunga is an outdated thing to say as they skateboard around, and they're floating because of anti-gravity gum that Fry had with him as well. It's convenient that the characters all still have the same possessions they had in their clothes because they'd expect them to be there without having amnesia. And the same logic for why they have their clothes would also apply to them having the possessions in their clothes. It still comes out of nowhere that they have these things in their pockets, but it makes sense. He's disappointed by a cardboard cutout of a robot, and the comic book guy is somehow not freaked out at seeing them on hoverboards, and just says they're ripping off a scene from a movie I never saw, so I don't mind. You can tell a lot about a writer or creator by how they portray fans of stuff. This guy got mad about something that clearly wasn't the problem. Hermes loves the filing system in Burns' office. Zoidberg sneezes caviar in his face and he gets mad at him. His hatred for him causes him to say Zoidberg's name from force of habit, and because of that, he ends up getting over his amnesia completely. Well, that was easy. It hasn't even been 24 hours. And there were microphones in Burns' office. I guess Burns was really interested in learning more about Zoidberg. Maybe that's why I wanted to hire him so easily. So Burns overhears Hermes say that they were from the future. It's surprising that he installed a camera in his office because yeah, it would be seen as a waste of time. But it makes him look smart here. Burns sends his hired goons out to kidnap them. And Smithers apologizes to Hermes because he has to obey Burns, even if it goes against everything he believes. Hermes wishes that Zoidberg had that kind of work ethic and is apologized to. Leela asks Lisa if this is where the hologram comes out, because she's used to a better kind of saxophone. To be fair, amnesia can be really temporary in real life too. But this is amnesia that's induced forcibly by brain spawn from another universe. The brain spawn kept trying to enforce amnesia on them for a minute after they were sent into the comic universe, instead of not realizing they failed to erase their memories because of Nibbler protecting them. Apparently, they figured they didn't have to keep forcing their memories to be in their subconscious for more than a minute. But they wouldn't know Nibbler wasn't around them to protect them anymore. Wouldn't they have never given up? It makes sense that they're remembering stuff about their old lives based on what they're used to expecting from life, and their old habits making them say stuff. But for them to remember everything based on remembering just one single thing is just confusingly jarring. Lisa was apparently too polite to inquire into why Leela asked if a hologram would come out of her saxophone, even though from her perspective, that'd make her look crazy. Conveniently, instead, there's no consequences. Leela has a thought bubble over her head showing her standing out in the rain outside the orphanage, and yet she says she doesn't remember her childhood, and thinks she would have wanted one like hers. The grass always looks greener on the other side. I don't think she would have appreciated having a brother like Bart. Leela tells her that if people don't give Lisa attention, she has to take it. I'm not sure if people should be taking advice from someone who tormented Lisa's bullies and risks getting arrested because of it. She stood up to some bullies, but she's forceful, and that can easily make her look bad. Lisa wishes she could be like her, and Leela says that when she needs to, she'll find her inner hero. Lisa plays the saxophone, and that makes her cry. It probably reminds her of Frying. And Lisa says that while she's glad her music touches her, why is that tear coming down the middle of her face? So now she's getting suspicious? She's not really having her intelligence shown off until this point. I mean, it was always obvious that she was a Cyclops because the sunglasses aren't nearly big enough to hide the fact that she has one big eye taking up all of her forehead. Lisa asks what happened to Maggie's teddy, and she cares enough about her to call it by its name. Marge says she's got to share her stuffed animals with the other baby. Yeah, who cares if the thing gets damaged apparently. She cares more about the new baby than her own flesh and blood. The second Leela sees Nibbler, she gets all of her memories back. This isn't a kid's comic. But at least here it kinda makes sense because Nibbler showed the magical ability to keep his friends from getting amnesia. He remembers who he is as well and uses his mass mind meld power to fill everyone in on the situation without lengthy exposition. And it cuts to a panel later where Lisa and Marge are conveniently cheerful about all of this. That's good pacing. But again, when you cut past stuff instead of showing it for even one panel, it's immersion breaking. He says he's also linked with the other Planet Express staff and restored their memories. Why couldn't it be written that he did that to restore all of their memories instead of Hermes confusing me? I guess Hermes got his memories back because of Nibbler. Somehow Marge just complains that Bart is riding a skateboard indoors when he just flew into the window. Nibbler wouldn't have known he was flying to tell her that ahead of time. Homer shows up with big news, and Bender shows up wearing a tuxedo and says he intends to make that jukebox an honest woman. Since when does he care? And why doesn't he know that the jukebox isn't a sentient robot? Nibbler explains things to Homer as well and senses great danger, magically, at the nuclear power plant. Homer called in sick with 24-hour polio. Burns would definitely see through that. It never made sense that he kept his job for so long. And there's really no reason for him to have the same job the whole show. Especially as it runs out of ideas and they're fine with showing off plots dedicated to the side characters. So they could still have episodes based on the people who work at the nuclear power plant. Because it's also Larry who works at the power plant. Because Homer's chewing on the gum, his entire car floats. I like that he says this is the best gum ever. And Marge feels like a voyeur for seeing Lovejoy's backyard. Leela says they're still moving too slow and need to lose some weight. It's amusing that Bender says he'll throw Fry out when he's the heaviest one. Fry has another smart idea telling him to get rid of all the stuff he stole from Flanders. I love how Flanders didn't annoy me with his worst quality, and said he was just there to be bothered by Bender. You'd think Leela would be the one with the good ideas and not Fry, but it's really great when he's smart. I don't know how all that stuff fits in Bender's chest. The holophoner definitely wouldn't fit. Usually when we see his chest compartment, it looks the size that you'd expect, with walls in it. But here it's a portal to a pocket universe, or shrink stuff in it to fit in it better. Farnsworth couldn't invent anything, but this still came out of nowhere. Homer spits out the gum because all the flavor left it, and he somehow forgot the gum was what was keeping them in the air, despite being told that 7 times. And not 1 time somehow. Yeah, I definitely don't like Homer. In fact, I hate that he's one of the main characters of his show, because it seems to be the worst thing about it. Go figure they don't die. The car gets a soft landing because of the Duff blimp being here of all places. People do get lucky in real life too, so it's not impossible. Bender says this calls for a celebratory smoke, and when he rebelliously lights up anyways after being told not to, he starts a fire, which would kill the people in the blimp. But no one comments on that, and the car gets saved by a magnet attached to the flying bike of Professor Frink. I wish the guy's voice in dialogue wasn't annoying, because I like him way better than Homer, just because of the sheer amount of things he could do with his inventing. Frink says some people need to leave the car because it's weighed down, and Fry and Lisa have to leave. And Fry asks why it's always him, and she relates to him about being the least favorite. Wait, you'd think it'd be Bart. She's amazed by the holophoner. I don't like fourth wall breaking, but at least I know that Fry's referring to the comic he's got in his jacket this time. So the main characters reach a room where Zoidberg's about to be thrown into a huge container of radioactive waste, and Burns wants to be sent to the future with them. Why wouldn't he want to go there from sheer curiosity's sake? Not to mention better medical technology. But now that I think about it, you already start to get jaded about how things are and nostalgic for the old days by your 20s, and he's an old man, so he'd already hate how the future is for him. Wouldn't he know that he'd hate the future even more? So it's a curiosity killed the cat scenario. Still, common sense would tell him he wouldn't be able to get a job if he went to the future, because he wouldn't have any records there of where he went to school, so he'd have to start all over again. Although, Fry was able to get a job. At least people can be told what job they're best for and get hired quickly if Fry's any indication, so it might not be too bad for him. But he's still an old man, so people once want to hire him. He can't just become a CEO right away all over again. He wanted to know what he was doing in the future. So he clearly hasn't thought this through. He'd probably just be able to get a job as a Walmart greeter. Farnsworth calmly tells him that he's created a device that might shatter the barrier that keeps the crew trapped here, but Burns can't come with him. And Bart shows him the Simpsons comic to prove it. Yeah, I don't buy it. They're in a parallel universe. All of the Simpsons characters are just as free-willed and intelligent as they are, instead of only being able to say what they're supposed to say according to the comic pages. So there's no reason why they wouldn't be able to follow them through a portal to the future. Homer says he's having zany adventures in the comic. Burns says he's had his way with this town and wants a new world to explore and conquer. What makes him think he'd be able to conquer their world? He hasn't conquered his, and he knows nothing about the future. Farnsworth calls him a young punk amusingly and gives him the device just like that. I guess he cares more about Zoidberg than he lets on, because Burns and Smithers are really outnumbered. Then it turns out Amy disguised herself as Smithers, having a smart idea. So she steals the device from Burns doing an impressive somersault, and pulls off a Smithers mask that she conveniently had right away. When she lost her memory, she checked her day planner and it all came back to her. She saw in the newspaper that Zoidberg was now Burns' doctor. She conveniently watched every episode of The Simpsons before this off-screen, even though it's a really old show, and people are already tired of it in the present day. It required a lot of willpower. So she assumed that Burns would be at the center of an evil plot at some point. Won't Fry be the only one familiar with The Simpsons because he's from the present? Maybe I could buy Bender knowing The Simpsons, because he's his best friend. But Amy? It's creative that she knows about it too, but we just have to assume Fry was the one who got her into the series. So there's a reason we only saw Amy now. It makes sense if she said she knows this because she read the Simpsons comic, which is still being published in the future. She took Smithers' place until Burns made his move. I choose to believe she only replaced Smithers as late as possible and stayed silent the whole time, because clearly they'd know it wasn't Smithers from her voice, not to mention it'd take a while for her to make a perfect latex mask of Smithers. The Mythbusters made perfect latex masks of each other's faces, and it was immediately obvious that it was just a mask if you were close up enough to them. So Amy would have to have perfected the technique in a way that only the future people can do. Where did she get the time? How did she know where to go so that she could make a latex mask? Burns is suddenly agile enough as an old man to steal the device. Oh, it's Smithers. How did he have a mask? He managed to get free of the ropes just fine because apparently he was the assistant to the magical Ernst and Gunther for years after college. At least he's impressing me with his competence, even if this is very surprising and confusing. I'd rather be surprised by something good than by incompetence. Smithers was in the big chair all along and gets the device back. So there was no point in writing Amy to have been impossibly competent then. It all amounted to nothing. So she should have just been with Hermes. He's told to drop the device by some aliens who threaten to destroy the city otherwise. So the aliens that are only supposed to exist in the Halloween episodes naturally show up in the Futurama crossover and scare the bad guys away after they popped up out of nowhere. Not everything needs to be foreshadowed, of course. Things happen out of nowhere in reality, too. It's just harder to take stuff seriously when it confuses you on the first impression. Farnsworth says the Galactic Time Council was disbanded a long time ago, and Homer calls the aliens ghosts, but it turns out they're just holophoner images, and Fry was doing the voices on the bullhorn. Lisa's a natural with the holophoner. Even though only a few people know how to play it in the future, and they don't even play it very well. So actually, she's extremely lucky she's able to play it well, saxophonist or not. It'd be great if she kept it for the rest of the Simpsons comic, because then people would get to see nice visuals with her music. Which is why that never happened, because that changed the status quo in a way that's good. Leela appreciates her help, and I appreciate that things made more sense than I thought they would, because it wasn't really the aliens. The aliens only looked like Kodos and the other guys a reference, and the heroes got saved by a Chekhov's gun instead of Diabolus Ex Machinas. Homer tries to save Zoidberg and drops him into the radioactive waste instead, and he magically survives and even gets mutated to look like a human with muscles, which is some nonsense. That's amusing enough to make me smile as he says, "It's worse than I thought! The women are all drooling with disgust!" Frank tells Farnsworth he can't use the device yet because it needs more research. It might even be a doomsday device. if they don't escape now, they'll be trapped forever. What makes him think that? He just wants an excuse to use the Doomsday device. The device tears the very fabric of this reality. The brains see a tear in the comic portal and want to get to Earth. The talking planet gets furious because the comic got damaged and destroys all of the brains, which shatters the barrier so that the main characters can merge their minds with Nibbler and get sent home. The story ends with him seeing Flanders running away from the robot devil and Robot Santa having a kid on his lap and a weapon, so he won't survive that. And Calculon likes spending time with Wolf Castle. Edna's dating Zap. It's mostly just people who are similar to each other in the two franchises hang out, being redundant together. So I'm just confused that everyone from the Simpsons universe is totally casual and nonchalant at suddenly being sent to the Futurama world. This story was about the Futurama crew easily getting their memories back and reuniting with Nibbler after Fry finally thinks to show Bart the Simpsons comic to prove to him that he's from another planet. Good thing it's lampshaded that he should have thought to use the comic to reunite with his friends a lot earlier, as the comic conveniently changed to reflect his adventures. Even though it's not this version of the comic that's a portal to another universe, it's the version of it in the real world. Burns wants to try to conquer the future after he overhears Hermes saying he's from the future, using a camera in his office, after he thinks Zoidberg should be hired as his new doctor. I hope the real reason he hired him as his new doctor was specifically so that he could get this kind of information, because there's no reason he would have hired him as his new doctor. I was actually disappointed that Burns failed, because I wanted to see his reaction to the future. Somehow nobody pointed out to him that he'd obviously hate it and not be successful at all. Farnsworth made a device to try to get them all out of the universe, and it damages the comic, causing the brains to get destroyed by the talking planet from earlier. I love Chekhov's guns, like the holophoner was. It's more believable that the aliens were just holograms. This was a pretty decent crossover. While it makes no sense that Zoidberg's body in the comic survived the toxic waste, it still made for some funny dialogue that made me look back on the story fondly. I liked that it all came to a head with Mr. Burns kidnapping Zoidberg, and Amy was really competent disguising herself as Smithers to get this far. Although it seems like bullshit because we weren't shown how the hell she managed to get a Smithers mask on such short notice, with no penny to her name, when she's not in the business of making perfect latex masks of people's faces. And also, it's not like she memorized the layout of the Simpsons town, so she would have had to go to the library and look up where the power plant was to figure out how to go there.